The Planning Board postpones a vote on the proposed Hyannis Parking Overlay District, and the Community Preservation Committee approves a proposed restoration project in Barnstable Village. All of that on this episode of Barnstable Today. It's Tuesday, January 26th, 2016. I'm Sarah Mannel. The Planning Board postpones a vote on the proposed Hyannis Parking Overlay District. Director of Growth Management Joanne Miller-Buntich talked about the need for the zoning amendment during this week's meeting.
It's the result of some anomalies that were discovered with these land uses going back many, many decades. Some confusion arose about their status, and so the town council created a subcommittee and convened that subcommittee and asked the assistance of staff, myself, Ruth Weil, Richard Scally, Elizabeth Hartsgrove all participated. Other folks who were involved were the building commissioner, the deputy fire chief of Hyannis Fire. And the direction that was taken was to create this ordinance, which overlays existing lots, as was described in the hearing, and create an as-of-right use with some performance standards for those uses.
Hyannis resident Felicia Penn voiced her concerns about the proposal during the public comment period.
Thank you. So what we're discussing here, I have 4 pages. I'd have a little handout, whatever, but we'll get to that. So it's the implementation of a new zoning layer over and above the existing zoning of these areas, apparently to address existing permitting issues. So you're asked to approve this zoning in order to, and I'm quoting from the summary that's in the ordinance, to organize the permitting process in better coordination with licensing. So since the 60s, permits for parking lots were issued directly from the town manager's office, and before that, the Board of Selectmen directly issued them. The message I received from reading the zoning ordinance is that the current system is not able to manage these permits, not able to manage the enforcement and regulatory aspects of these permits, and that there's no clear coordination with licensing. That seems to be the purpose for coming up with a zoning overlay district, because evidently something in the process right now is quote-unquote broken, my words. So there's a sentence in the summary that indicates that this zoning change, quote, more clearly adds this as permitted use for these specific lots. So I wanted to ask staff to please clarify which lots, as of this moment, are not clearly permitted for parking, or in another way, are there lots designated in the zone that currently do not hold a permit or variance for parking?
No, all the lots in the overlay district have some form of permission. Be it a special permit or pre-existing vested rights or a license.
Okay. I'm taking issue with one of them still, but I'll get to that later. Okay. So what this zoning appears to do is identify public safety standards, parking lot space sizes, and it adds some visual enhancement requirements. So it just seems like a heavy hammer to me to actually require zoning to do that. What is it about the present structured town hall that prevents the town from soliciting the same behavior with the parking permits that are already in place? Many of the permits, when they were issued, had regulatory things with them, like no dumpsters on site, egress here, enter there, it's how many cars they could park, et cetera, et cetera. I just don't understand why you need zoning to enforce a permit or a variance that's already there. So if enforcement is the issue, how will this zoning change the ability of the town to enforce the permitting regulations? There is no enforcement section in the Zoning Act that details what the process is or what the penalties are for nonconformance. Zoning typically characterizes the highest and best use for properties contained within its zone. I don't believe that parking lots represent, in some cases, depending on the lot you're looking at, the highest and best use for every parcel of land included in the zone here. as before us.
And attorney Matt Spillane represented Pleasant Street Realty Trust during the hearing. He asked that his client, also known as Baxter's, be included in the Hyannis Parking Overlay District.
Baxter's Fish and Chips would like to be considered as being part of the parcels being given by right ability to have open air parking. Now you'd probably think, well, why would Baxter's want to have the right to establish a parking lot on this business? And the reason is actually quite simple. Under the bylaws proposed, you'll see that it allows principal use businesses to operate open air lots if, in fact, they have sufficient parking to cover what they need to cover under their parking requirements for customers and employees. In this particular case, the lot that is located on the property that I'm speaking of would actually have about 24 extra spaces beyond what is required to fulfill its duties running a restaurant use. And I guess the question you would probably wonder is, okay, well, why would they want to parcel off 24 spaces and have 24 spaces available for paid parking? And the answer is simple. Right now they have an enforcement problem down there of their own. People come down, they park their cars, and they bolt. They go off, they do other things. And in a day of social media where people can get on Yelp or TripAdvisor and trash a local business fairly easily because a car has been towed, it's just not a problem that the owners want to deal with anymore. I think their thoughts are, if they had a parking meter up there and if somebody wants to come down and pay, well, that's the price of doing business. They can pay and they can be off and do their business.
Ultimately, the Planning Board voted to continue discussing the matter at its next meeting, February 8th. The Community Preservation Committee approved funding a project that will restore the old colonial courthouse on Main Street in Barnstable Village. Attorney Joe Berlandi talked about the need for the project before the vote.
This building, as you know, is old. It's one of the oldest buildings in the village, if not the oldest. And in the last few years, we have opened it up to the community. Every year, we reenact the protest that took place in 1774 by the Patriots, which prevented a trial from going forward. And that every year, we have about 300 children from the elementary schools in Barnstable that come and we put on our gowns and our wigs and we actually reenact the trial, which never took place. But the point is, if it did take place, we enact what would have happened. So it's open to the school children, and they all see this wonderful building, and they get a history of what happened at this site. We have opened up this building in the last few years with other nonprofits in the village. We share it with the library when we have our author event every year. We share it with the Barnstable Village Association. We have our meetings there. We share it with the Barnstable Historical Society. We have our meetings there. And the point is, we make it available. Years ago, it was probably very closed, so to speak, and people didn't even know it existed. They know it exists now. And as stewards of this building, we're responsible to make sure that it's maintained. So we're asking you for this funding for phase one, which is a total of $170,000, 50% from the Mass Cultural Foundation.
Ultimately, the committee agreed with Berlandi and approved spending $85,000 to renovate the old colonial courthouse. Tales of Cape Cod is hoping the remaining $85,000 cost for phase one of renovations would be funded with a Massachusetts Cultural Foundation grant. Town Council will also need to sign off on the funding. Well, be sure to tune in to our hour-long news program, Barnstable This Morning, weekdays at 8 a.m. On tomorrow's show, we will chat with President of the Cape and Islands Workforce Investment Board, David Augustino. We'll also chat with Director of Senior Services, Madeline Noonan. Plus, we'll have all the news and information you need. For Barnstable Today, I'm Sarah Mantle.